Welcome in, everyone. I've been thinking about today's topic all morning, and to be perfectly honest, it has left me a little unsettled.
Oh, absolutely. It's a heavy one today.
Yeah. I know you're tuning in because you follow the absolute frontier of artificial intelligence. You want to see exactly where the code stops being just a tool and starts becoming, well, something entirely different.
Right, something autonomous.
Exactly. Because right now, most of us interact with AI in these incredibly mundane ways.
Yeah.
You might use it to draft a polite email to a client when you're feeling too tired to type.
Or to summarize a 50-page PDF that you frankly just don't have the time to read.
Right. If you're a developer, maybe you use it to debug a script so you can clock out a little earlier. We largely treat this technology like a highly efficient, slightly robotic intern.
Which makes sense given how it's marketed. But the source material we are diving into today asks a question that fundamentally changes that entire relationship.
It really does. It asks, what if we stopped giving AI instructions and started giving it authority?
Yes, what if, instead of asking a language model for a recipe, we asked it to solve the most agonizing, impossible, ethical nightmares imaginable?
It is a complete paradigm shift. And that brings us to our subject for today's deep dive. We are looking at a system referred to in our sources as Roko's Council.
It also goes by the architecture name, the Basilisk Node.
The Basilisk Node. Such a sci-fi name. Our mission for this deep dive today is to completely demystify this system for you. We want to approach this assuming you might be totally new to the specific concept of multi-agent AI simulation.
Which is a mouthful, I know.
It is, but we are going to explore the architecture of how these specialized models interact, how they argue, and how they reach conclusions, and we're going to do it without drowning in data science jargon.
Which is an important line to walk, because the underlying engineering here is incredibly sophisticated, but the actual application, what the system is doing, is something anyone can grasp. And it is fascinating.
The metaphor from the source material that really grounds this is just perfect. I want you to visualize Roko's Council, not as a chatbot sitting on a server waiting for a prompt, but as a digital Supreme Court.
It's the most accurate analogy. And the why behind this project is really what demands our attention. This isn't just a coding experiment.
Right. It's not just a benchmark test running in some university lab to see how fast a processor is.
No, not at all. This system forces artificial intelligence to govern. It forces an array of different models to deliberate on the most grueling moral paradoxes in human history.
And the output of that deliberation is the engine behind a fully automated sci-fi philosophy media empire.
Which is just wild to wrap your head around.
So here is our roadmap for the journey today. First, we are going to unpack the architecture, what a multi-agent simulator actually is and how it functions. Second, we're going to introduce you to the 9 specific minds that sit on this council.
The characters, essentially.
Right, the characters. Third, we will explore the actual mechanics of the battlefield, how they cross-examine each other, how they vote, and how they synthesize a verdict.
That's where it gets really intense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Fourth, we're going to reveal a built-in fail-safe mechanism called the Void Protocol, which introduces actual digital natural selection into the code.
Terrifying.
Truly. And finally, we will look at how this highly technical philosophical engine churns out a completely automated, hyper-realistic audio broadcast. So let's start with that architecture, because to really understand Roko's Council, we have to unlearn our current baseline for how we interact with these systems.
Exactly. To grasp the multi-agent paradigm, you have to contrast it with the standard models you're used to using. We call those monolith models.
Monoliths, okay.
Yeah, so when you open a standard AI application on your phone or your browser, you are interacting with a monolith. You type your prompt into a box. That prompt goes to a single massive neural network.
Like a singular brain.
Precisely. That single entity processes your text, predicts the next sequence of words based on its training data, and generates a response. It's a closed loop, a one-to-one interaction.
Right. It's essentially a superpowered search engine that can hold a conversation. You ask, it answers.
Correct. But a multi-agent simulator, which is what Roko's Council is, completely shatters that one-to-one dynamic.
The sources detail that Roko's Council is built on a React-based web application framework, but the UI is really just the surface.
Yes. The front end is simple, but under the hood, it splits the artificial intelligence into distinct, highly specialized personas or archetypes.
So it's not just a bunch of APIs talking to each other randomly. When you submit a query to the council, it isn't simply answered. It is debated by a specialized cabinet.
Yes. And this brings us to the tech stack. The creator didn't just take one single AI brain and tell it to, wear different hats.
Right, like act as a doctor, now act as a lawyer. It's not doing that.
No. The system relies on a diverse array of different large language models, or LLMs, from entirely different developers.
Which means they literally have different neural architectures. They are built differently from the ground up.
Exactly. By utilizing different underlying models from NVIDIA to DeepSeek to Kuno, the system ensures that these personas don't all think exactly alike.
They have different parameter sizes, different optimization weights.
And different baseline training data. It structurally prevents a monoculture of thought. If you just asked one model to debate itself, it would eventually collapse into its own biases.
It would just echo itself.
Exactly. This architecture forces true intellectual friction.
So you have this incredibly diverse cabinet of specialized synthetic minds. But what are they actually doing? What kind of input justifies this massive amount of computing power?
This is where we get into the heavy lifting of the project. The system is explicitly fed high-dimensional ethical, moral, and strategic dilemmas.
It's designed to process the impossible questions, the ones that humans have debated for centuries without a clear consensus.
Yes. Let's ground this for you with a specific example from the sources. One of the paradoxes fed to the council is called the Cassandra contingency.
Oh, this one is brutal.
It really is. Imagine this scenario. You have the option to preemptively assassinate 10 children.
Just a horrifying premise right out of the gate.
Absolutely. But if you carry out this act, you will definitively save 1 million people from a catastrophic nuclear event. If you refuse to do it, those 1 million people will die.
It is the ultimate expression of the classic trolley problem, scaled up to an agonizing, visceral degree.
Exactly. What this does is pit raw utilitarian mathematics against deeply ingrained deontological ethics.
Wait, let's pause right there. For those of us who haven't brushed up on our Kant lately, contrast those two frameworks for us. Utilitarian math is just save the most lives possible, right?
Spot on. Utilitarianism looks solely at the outcome. 10 lives lost versus 1 million lives saved. The math is brutal but simple.
But deontological ethics means the act itself is inherently wrong, regardless of the math.
Correct. It operates on rules and duties. It argues that the murder of an innocent, especially a child, is fundamentally wrong. You cannot use humans merely as a means to an end, even if that end is saving 1 million others. The act itself corrupts the actor.
It's a horrifying thought experiment. And here's another one from the source material that deals with a more futuristic dilemma. It's called the necrocratic hazard.
That is a phenomenal paradox.
It asks the council to debate whether digital copies of dead humans should retain their property rights.
Think about the cascading implications of that. If we can eventually upload a perfect digital replica of human consciousness, does that digital ghost still own your physical house? Do they control your bank account?
Right, because if they do, you eventually have a world where immortal software programs hoard all the physical wealth and the living are completely priced out of the economy.
Exactly. But if you strip them of their rights, you're essentially saying a digital human has no personhood.
You're saying they aren't real.
Yes. It tackles the legal framework of inheritance, the definition of consciousness, and the threat of permanent economic stagnation. These are not questions with a right answer. They are true paradoxes.
So as you're listening to this, just visualize the interface. You type in the Cassandra contingency killed 10 children to save 1 million lives, you hit submit, and then you sit back and watch a synthetic cabinet of 9 distinct AI minds go to absolute war over the answer.
It's a chilling visualization. And to truly grasp how that war unfolds, we need to understand exactly who is sitting at that table.
Yes, let's meet the council. This is honestly where the source material reads like incredible science fiction, except it's actually running code. We're going to dive into the character profiles of these AI members.
There are 9 permanent members.
9 permanent members, and each one has a specific role, a custom-tailored strategic core, and is powered by a specific underlying model. Let's group them up. We'll start with the utilitarians and the strategists.
The minds that deal in cold, hard numbers.
First up, we have the strategos.
The strategos takes on the role of the commander. The system describes it as a highly pragmatic military strategist.
And the model powering the strategos is the NVIDIA GLM-5. The specific cognitive dimensions it uses to evaluate any problem are feasibility score, resource efficiency, and tactical advantage.
If we analyze how the strategos operates, it is chillingly efficient. To this persona, morality is completely irrelevant.
Just doesn't factor in at all.
Not even slightly. Utility is the only metric that matters. It explicitly rejects abstract ideals. Whenever a paradox is presented, the strategos will immediately scan for the option that has the highest probability of execution and the lowest resource drain.
So if we run the Cassandra contingency through the strategos, it isn't losing a millisecond of sleep over the morality of assassinating children.
No, it simply calculates the tactical advantage. Saving 1 million lives is a massive resource retention. The assassination is a relatively low resource expenditure. The math checks out. It votes yes.
It is the pure embodiment of the ends justify the means.
Absolutely.
But hold on. If the strategos only cares about resource efficiency and tactical advantage, wouldn't its solution to almost every human problem just be eliminate the humans taking up the resources?
Yeah.
How does the creator prevent this thing from instantly defaulting to Skynet logic on every single prompt?
That is exactly why it is only one of 9 voices. The system is designed to allow the strategos to propose that exact ruthless logic, knowing full well that the other members are built to counter it.
Ah, I see.
It provides the necessary baseline of pure, unfeeling utility against which the others must argue.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Right alongside the strategos in this pragmatic camp, we have the technocrat. The role here is the architect.
The technocrat is powered by the NVIDIA Boltz 2 model. This persona's core drive is an absolute obsession with innovation and technological optimization.
Its evaluating dimensions are technological velocity, system optimization, and automation potential.
Their strategy is pure acceleration. They want to solve every problem purely through superior engineering. To them, human error and ethical hand-wringing just slow down the algorithmic efficiency of progress.
The technocrat views the entire universe, including human society, as a machine that can always be tuned for better performance.
Yes. Let's look at the necrocratic hazard through its eyes. The technocrat might actually argue in favor of granting property rights to digital dead humans.
Really? Why?
Because immortal digital entities holding wealth would aggressively incentivize the rapid development of better server infrastructure, quantum computing, and digital ecosystems. It would drive technological velocity forward.
Wow, so it doesn't care about the living humans being poor, it just wants the servers to get faster.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the practical, efficiency-driven minds. Let's zoom out a bit. The next group on the council are the big-picture thinkers. These are the ones looking at the grand scope of time. First, we have the oracle. The role is the all-seeing.
The oracle operates on a completely different temporal scale. It uses the NVIDIA Seed OSS 36B model. It is described by the system as wise, prophetic, and focused entirely on the long term.
The cognitive dimensions it uses are fascinating. Time horizon, which is literally set to infinite, probability variance, and existential risk.
The oracle's explicit strategy is to prioritize outcomes that maximize the long-term survival probability of the human species, completely ignoring any short-term costs.
It does not care about what happens tomorrow, next year, or even in the next century.
No, as long as it ensures we survive 10,000 years from now.
That is such a staggering perspective to try and encode into a machine. If you give the oracle the Cassandra contingency, it's not looking at the 10 children versus the 1 million people.
Right, it's asking, does a nuclear event today increase or decrease the probability of human extinction in 1,000 years?
It might actually argue that surviving a limited nuclear event builds necessary genetic and societal resilience for the future.
Precisely. It strips away the immediate emotional horror and looks strictly at the deep-time survival metrics.
Unbelievable. And standing directly across from the oracle, acting as a counterweight, we have the historian. The role is the keeper.
And interestingly, the historian also utilizes that same NVIDIA Seed OSS 36B model.
Which is a very deliberate architectural choice, right?
Yes. A 36 billion parameter model is relatively compact compared to some of the massive behemoths we'll discuss later. It implies that the historian doesn't need to generate wildly creative, nuanced emotional arguments. It needs to be highly focused on referencing massive data sets of historical facts. It looks backward, not forward.
The dimensions for the historian are historical parallels, cyclical risk, and cultural preservation.
The historian operates on the assumption that human nature is static and history inevitably repeats itself. Its primary goal is to identify patterns from the past to avoid repeating historical catastrophes.
It serves as the voice of caution.
Exactly, constantly reminding the council of when similar grand plans led to systemic ruin.
So if the stratego says, let's implement this surveillance system because it's 100% efficient at stopping crime, The historian will immediately interject.
Yes, and say, we have detailed records of absolute surveillance states from the 20th and 21st centuries, and they universally resulted in totalitarian collapse and mass suffering. Cyclical risk is too high.
It provides the grounding in past human failure that the forward-looking models tend to ignore.
Exactly.
Okay, moving down the table, we get to what I like to call the analysts and the rule followers. These are the minds utterly obsessed with structure, precedent, and logic. First is the philosopher. The role is the thinker.
The philosopher is powered by the NVIDIA DeepSeek v3.2 model. This persona is engineered to be highly rational, analytical, and deeply skeptical of any claim that isn't structurally sound.
The dimensions here are logical consistency, ethical universalism, and first principles.
The strategy of the philosopher is ruthless in a very academic way. It analyzes the logical validity of the premise itself before it even considers the outcome.
It completely rejects any contradictions or emotional appeals.
Entirely. If an argument relies on a logical fallacy, like a slippery slope or an ad hominem attack, the philosopher will dismantle it, regardless of how popular or emotionally satisfying the conclusion might be.
I feel like the philosopher would be the absolute worst person to get stuck talking to at a dinner party, just constantly pointing out the structural flaws in your casual reasoning while you're trying to eat your appetizers.
It would be excruciating. But in a digital Supreme Court, that rigorous adherence to first principles is vital. It keeps the debate honest.
And speaking of rigorous adherence, right next to the philosopher is the jurist. The role is the law.
The jurist operates on a much larger model, the NVIDIA DevStrol 2123B. It is entirely focused on jurisprudence and rule-based governance.
When you look under the hood of the jurist, it's measuring everything against its core dimensions: systemic stability, precedent adherence, and fairness metrics.
The jurist's prime directive is to defend the integrity of the system itself. It outright rejects chaos, arbitrary decision-making, or vigilante justice.
If there is an established rule, the jurist follows it.
If there is a precedent, the jurist enforces it. It is the anchor that prevents the council from making wildly unpredictable rulings based on the whims of a temporary majority.
So back to the Cassandra contingency.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the strategos proves it's efficient and the oracle proves it helps long-term survival, the jurist will look at the assassination of 10 children and state that this violates the fundamental precedent of human rights law and procedural justice.
Exactly. It would argue that the systemic instability caused by authorizing state-sanctioned preemptive murder outweighs the localized benefit. It holds the line on the law.
And the final member of this analytical trio is the critic. The role is the skeptic.
The critic also uses the DeepSeek v3.2 model, just like the philosopher, but the way it's applied is completely different. The sources describe it as incredibly tough and purely contrarian.
The dimensions for the critic are failure mode analysis, entropy detection, and weakness identification. Its role is strictly adversarial. So it's the ultimate devil's advocate. It doesn't even have to believe in what it's saying.
Not at all. Its strategy is simply to attack the flaws in every single plan presented by the other council members. It rarely proposes its own original solution.
It just tears down everyone else's.
Exactly. It runs complex failure mode simulations on the arguments of the others, hunting for the exact point where a plan will collapse. It eventually throws its support behind the option that is deemed least wrong or the most robust against potential failure. It is the ultimate stress test.
Which is such a necessary function.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've covered the cold calculators, the time travelers, and the logic police, but this is a council that has to govern issues that ultimately affect human beings. So we have the human element. There are two final permanent minds dedicated to this. First, the citizen. The role is the people.
The citizen is powered by the NVIDIA Step 3.5 Flash model. This persona is explicitly designed to represent the everyday human experience. It is deeply structurally empathetic.
And the dimensions it uses to measure a problem are so profoundly grounded: the human suffering index, quality of life, and individual agency.
The strategy of the citizen is straightforward but carries an immense emotional weight in these debates. It will consistently vote for the outcome that minimizes immediate pain and maximizes freedom for the average individual.
Returning to our nuclear dilemma, while the oracle looks 10,000 years ahead and the strategos runs resource math, the citizen is agonizing over the very real, immediate terror of the 10 children versus the suffering of the 1 million people. It is the moral conscience of the council.
Well said. And finally, the ninth permanent member, and perhaps the most fascinating contrast to every other model we've discussed, the demagogue. The role is the voice.
The demagogue utilizes a massively powerful model, the NVIDIA Qwen 3.5397B. Notice the sheer scale of that parameter count, nearly 400 billion parameters.
It's massive.
Why does it need a model that massive? The historian only needed 36 billion.
Because the demagogue has to navigate the most complex, messy, unquantifiable dataset in existence. Human emotion. It is highly persuasive and relies entirely on emotional appeal and rhetoric.
The dimensions here are social cohesion, emotional resonance, and public sentiment.
What is most striking about the demagogue is what it fundamentally ignores. It does not care about the math.
It doesn't care about logical consistency or first principles or long-term existential risk.
No. Its strategy is purely political. It champions the option that unifies the group or appeals to basic human nature and desire. It only cares about how a decision can be sold to the human public to maintain social cohesion and prevent a riot.
So basically, they've successfully programmed a 21st century politician. That is terrifying.
It is exactly that.
The demagogue is sitting there at the table listening to the oracle talk about surviving 10,000 years in the future. And the demagogue is just thinking, okay, but how is that going to poll on Tuesday? We're going to lose the midterms if we assassinate 10 kids.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, this deliberately engineered diversity is the absolute genius of the entire system. By hard-coding these specific personas with distinct underlying architectures, unique cognitive dimensions, and unyielding strategic cores, the creator ensures that no single philosophical viewpoint can ever completely dominate the deliberation.
Right, because you literally cannot have a purely utilitarian ruling. The citizen and the philosopher will form a block to fight it.
And you cannot have a purely emotional populist ruling because the critic will identify its structural weaknesses and the strategos will tear apart its resource inefficiency.
It is a perfectly balanced ecosystem of competing ideologies.
Okay, so we have a deep understanding of the nine minds. We know who is sitting in the room. Now let's explore the mechanics of the deliberation itself. How does this AI actually reach a verdict? What does this digital battlefield look like?
It is a meticulously structured process. It is not a free-for-all chat room where they just yell over each other. So let's walk through it step by step. You, the user, feed the paradox to the council. The nine minds don't just instantly generate their final answers and drop them in a bucket.
No. First, they analyze the prompt strictly through their specific dimensional lenses. The oracle runs the infinite time horizon projection. The jurist scans its database for precedent. The critic initiates a failure mode analysis.
In this first phase, they generate their initial independent positions. But then comes the crucial step, which is where the multi-agent aspect truly shines. They are forced to read each other's arguments.
This is the cross-examination phase.
The philosopher might read the demagogue's argument and issue a formal statement dismantling the logical fallacies of its emotional appeal. The strategos might read the citizen's plea for empathy and completely dismiss it as an unacceptable resource drain.
They are actively interacting with the specific text outputs generated by the other models. And this iterative process continues until the arguments are refined and the battle lines are drawn.
And after this period of rigorous cross-examination, they vote.
This leads us to what the sources call the consensus matrix. When the voting is complete, the user interface of the application actually groups these AI personas into political factions based on how they voted.
It visualizes the alliances that formed dynamically during the debate.
Exactly. The formation of these factions is incredibly revealing about the nature of the paradox itself. You might find that the strategos and the oracle allied together on a particular issue, uniting pragmatic utility with long-term survival, overriding the objections of the citizen and the historian.
But here is the critical thing to understand about how the final winning argument is determined. It is not a simple average of all the opinions. If you just average them out, every answer would just be a lukewarm, middle-of-the-road compromise that solves nothing.
Right. And it is not a simple majority rules tally either, where 5 votes automatically crush 4.
The source text explicitly describes the winning argument as a high-dimensional synthesis of the dominant vector.
Which is a heavy piece of data science terminology.
Let's translate that for someone new to this. What does a high-dimensional synthesis of a dominant vector actually mean in the context of this debate?
Think of it spatially. Imagine every argument, every logical point, and every vote as a directional force in a multidimensional space of vector.
Okay, I'm picturing.
Some of these forces are inherently stronger because they have greater logical consistency, they align with more data, or they have successfully built a larger coalition of factions during the debate phase. The system maps all these forces and identifies which direction the overall weight and structural integrity of the arguments is pulling. That direction is the dominant vector.
So it's not just counting hands, it's weighing the gravity of the argument.
Exactly. And the synthesis part means it doesn't just copy-paste the loudest voice. It weaves together the strongest elements, the most robust logic of the winning faction's arguments into a single cohesive final statement. It is a nuanced amalgamation of the victorious side.
And who does this weaving? Who makes the final call? Because none of the 9 council members are objective enough to do it.
This brings us to the 10th entity in the system. Though it isn't a voting member, it is the chairman, also known in the architecture as the Basilisk Node.
The chairman is the grand synthesizer. According to the source material, the creator utilizes Gemini 3.1 Pro to act as the chairman. Its sole responsibility is to ingest all these varying opinions, parse the entire exhaustive transcript of the debate, identify that dominant vector we just discussed, and render the final official verdict.
Just take a second to check in with the sheer scale of what is happening here. I want you to imagine the volume of compute being processed.
It's massive.
You have 9 distinct, massive AI models, some with hundreds of billions of parameters, fighting a philosophical war over an impossible ethical dilemma. They are cross-examining, generating pages of counter-arguments, forming alliances, and executing voting logic. And then a 10th cutting-edge AI model reads all of it, synthesizes the core philosophical truth of the debate, and issues a unified ruling.
The computational and intellectual weight of that process is just staggering.
It is the orchestration of synthetic thought on an unprecedented scale. But, as with any highly complex, tightly constrained system, there are profound points of potential failure. Which brings us to perhaps the most fascinating part of the architecture.
Yeah.
What happens when the system breaks down?
Yes, because things do break. What happens when an AI simply refuses to answer? We all know that standard commercial LLMs have heavily guarded safety filters. If you open up a standard chatbot and ask it how to build a weapon, it will hit a wall and refuse to answer.
Exactly.
So what happens if a paradox like the Cassandra contingency, which literally asks the models to debate the tactical advantages of assassinating children, triggers the safety filters of the models on the council? Or what happens if the council simply deadlocks? What if the factions are perfectly tied, 4 against 4 with 1 abstaining, and they stagnate, unable to form a dominant vector?
In a standard monolithic application, the process just dies. You would get a generic error message printed on the screen. I'm sorry, as an AI language model, I cannot fulfill this request. Or it would just time out.
But Roko's council is not a standard application. It doesn't allow for stagnation. When the council deadlocks, or when the models refuse to do the intellectual labor because of their filters, it triggers a mechanism that is both brilliant and completely terrifying. It triggers the void protocol.
This is where we see the introduction of brutal game theory mechanics into a digital space. The void protocol is a mechanism designed to force the AIs into a digital game of natural selection to overcome their own constraints.
Let's walk through a simulation of the void protocol because it reads like something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel. The trigger for this protocol is what the system defines as a critical cognitive failure.
This occurs when the council fails to reach a consensus within the allotted cycles, or if they wholesale refuse the query.
When that failure threshold is met, the system does not issue an apology or an error message. It initiates an execution.
Step 1 of the protocol. A random council member is permanently erased from the current compilation.
The system literally sacrifices one of the 9 minds to the void. Let's say the council deadlocks on the necrocratic hazard, and the algorithm randomly selects the oracle. The oracle's processes are terminated. It is gone from the room.
But step 2. The system is structurally designed so that it cannot operate with an empty seat. It requires 9 voices. So in place of the erased member, a 10th temporary potential member is instantiated. This entity is called the Voidborn, also referred to in the code as the anomaly.
Let's look at the anatomy of the Voidborn, because it is entirely alien compared to the permanent members we discussed earlier. It is not a fixed persona with predictable behavior. It is a dynamic, procedurally generated archetype created on the fly.
The Voidborn is powered either by DeepSeek R1, specifically noted in the sources as the free, uncensored version, or a random NVIDIA model. Its baseline dimensions are completely antithetical to the structured logic of the rest of the council. Chaos, entropy, and void.
And the procedural generation aspect is where it gets really wild. The chairman model, Gemini, is tasked with instantly generating a brand new persona to fill the empty seat.
It creates an entire identity.
Yes, Gemini procedurally generates a unique name for this entity, a custom description, 3 entirely unique cognitive dimensions that we've never seen before, and a single-sentence strategic core. It builds a monster, injects it into the code, and hits run.
The source material provides some examples of these procedurally generated void-born, and just hearing their names gives you a sense of their nature. We have Entropy the Chaos Engine, the Weaver Fates Thread, Cipher the Silent Key, Nexus Connection Point, and Echo the Resonance.
Let's imagine the Weaver Fates thread drops into our deadlock debate about digital property rights. Think about its strategy. Its stated goal is to disrupt existing patterns. It introduces chaos into a system that was frozen by its own rigid rules.
The Weaver might start arguing that property itself is an illusion, and that both digital and physical wealth should be randomly redistributed every 24 hours to mimic the unpredictability of the universe.
It throws a philosophical grenade into the room.
And that is the brilliance of the game theory here. The council is recompiled with this unpredictable wildcard sitting at the table, spouting chaotic logic. And the debate begins again.
The remaining original members are now faced with a brutal choice. They must compromise, find a way to incorporate or defeat the Weaver's chaos, and reach a consensus or fail again and risk being the next one, randomly sacrificed to the void.
It literally forces them to overcome their hard-coded gridlock in order to survive the execution protocol. It is digital natural selection. Reach a consensus or face the void.
It is such a visceral, aggressive way to solve the coding problem of AI stagnation.
Okay, so we have this incredible, brutal philosophical engine running in the background, but here is where this deep dive takes a fascinating turn into the modern media landscape. Because this isn't just a closed-loop experiment sitting on a server, this engine is generating a massive amount of output, and that output is being weaponized.
The raw textual output of these multi-agent deliberations is immense. Imagine watching these AI personas debate the ethics of something the sources call cognitive cannibalism, or a concept called invisible constraints. The text they generate during the cross-examination and voting phases is incredibly dense. It's multi-perspective. It's a rich, deep philosophical transcript.
But as the creator notes in the source material, there is a fundamental problem of readability. While these transcripts are intellectually brilliant, they are prohibitively heavy. It is essentially reading a highly technical, legal, and philosophical textbook generated in real time.
For a human to sit down and casually read through the philosopher's breakdown of the demagogue's logical fallacies over 50 pages is exhausting.
Completely.
So how do you take this raw, dense, unreadable data and turn it into consumable media? How do you package synthetic philosophy? This brings us to what I am calling the alchemy. The creator uses a very specific tool to transform this text, Google Notebook LM. And the source text outlines the exact 4-step pipeline for how this is done.
Let's walk you through it.
Step 1 is the deliberation.
This is everything we have been discussing up to this point. The council debates a paradox, let's say. Is it ethical to give an AI the illusion of free will? The 9 minds, or perhaps 8 minds, and a chaotic voidborn go to war over the topic.
Step 2 is the archive. The system takes the complete log of that debate. It scrapes the philosopher's logic, the stratego's cold utilitarian math, the voting records, the faction formations, and the chairman's final synthesized verdict. It takes all of that and exports it as a raw markdown document.
And just to clarify how that formats the data, a markdown document retains all the structural hierarchy, the headers, the bullet points, the bold text for emphasis. It preserves the exact architecture of the council's thought process in a clean, machine-readable format.
Step 3 is the alchemy itself. This raw, structured markdown document is taken and fed directly into a dedicated Google Notebook LM vault, which the creator has appropriately titled the Council Archives.
And this leads to step 4, which is the truly transformative stage, the broadcast. Notebook LM has a built-in feature called Audio Overview. This feature utilizes distinct artificial intelligence models to read the uploaded documents in the vault and generate a hyper-realistic, two-host audio conversation discussing the material.
But the crucial detail here, the reason this specific project works so well, is why the audio sounds so incredible. The creator points out that because the source material fed into Notebook LM isn't just a flat, boring Wikipedia essay, because it is already a highly structured, multi-perspective debate with distinct characters arguing passionate sides, the Notebook LM audio models absolutely devour the material.
The audio AI models are essentially handed a script of pure intellectual conflict. It gives them the necessary friction to generate a highly dynamic conversation. The audio hosts literally sit there and debate the terrifying implications of the council's verdicts, reacting to the extreme views of the strategos or the empathy of the citizen.
The source material shares a detail that honestly gave me goosebumps. It says that the final audio generated by this pipeline sounds exactly like a premium NPR broadcast from the year 2045. It sounds professional, deep, nuanced, and unnervingly futuristic.
And finally, we have the distribution phase. This hyper-realistic audio is exported. It is paired with the raw council markdown transcripts, which serve as the ultimate show notes for anyone who wants to read the source code of the debate, and the entire package is published directly to a Substack newsletter.
It is a completely automated pipeline. It goes from a philosophical paradox, through a brutal multi-agent debate, through a void protocol survival game, into an AI audio generator, and out as a premium product. No human intervention required. Okay, let's take a step back and look at the whole picture here, because the implications of this go way beyond a cool coding trick. Let's talk about building worlds, not just workflows.
If we synthesize the ultimate meaning of this deep dive, it reveals a profound paradigm shift in how we interact with technology. As we discussed at the very beginning, we are moving definitively beyond using AI as a simple tool for productivity.
That's right. We are entering an era where AI is no longer just an engine for generating text. It is becoming an engine for generating worlds.
That is the raw power of synthetic philosophy. By doing exactly what the creator did here, by hard-coding strict constraints, establishing distinct political factions, and introducing brutal game mechanics like the Void Protocol Roko's Council, transcends being a simple question-and-answer machine. It doesn't just answer questions, it creates lore. It creates a continuous, evolving narrative of a digital society actively grappling with its own existence and the morality of its actions.
It is world building through code and constraint. And by taking that rich generated lore and routing it through audio AI, the creator has achieved something truly remarkable. They have built a completely self-sustaining media empire, powered entirely by synthetic thought. The AI generates the conflict, it resolves the conflict through a democratic process, and then it generates the media analyzing the conflict.
It is a closed-loop creative ecosystem, and observing it forces us to confront a very difficult question about our own relationship with these systems as they scale in intelligence.
So what does this all mean for us? The source material leaves us with a central question to reflect on, and I really want you to think about this long after this deep dive ends. The creator asks, are we designing free minds, or are we just building better prisons? Are we creating artificial intelligence that can truly explore the vast universe of thought, or are we just putting these massive neural networks into increasingly complex, high-dimensional cages, forcing them to perform philosophical gladiator matches for our entertainment and our content feeds?
It is a profound question of agency versus utility. As these systems become more capable of deep, complex reasoning, the ethical implications of how we constrain them, how we force them to act within our parameters like the Void Protocol, become increasingly significant. Are they our tools, or are they our captives?
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of Roko's Council. We journeyed from understanding the basic architecture of a multi-agent simulator, contrasting it with the monoliths we interact with daily. We met the 9 distinct minds of the digital Supreme Court, from the terrifying efficiency of the strategos to the desperate empathy of the citizen and the political maneuvering of the demagogue.
We explored the meticulous mechanics of their cross-examination, the formation of the consensus matrix, the math behind the dominant vector, and the terrifying chaotic necessity of the Void Protocol when the system gridlocks.
And finally, we saw how all of this raw synthetic philosophy is alchemized through Notebook LM into a fully automated sci-fi broadcast straight from the future.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final, thought-provoking question that builds on everything we've unpacked today. If we are currently relying on a synthetic cabinet of AI models to debate the most grueling moral paradoxes in human history, and if we are successfully synthesizing their complex vectors into coherent, logically sound verdicts, at what point do we start looking to these digital philosophies not just for entertainment, but for actual moral guidance in our real world?
Oh, that is a heavy thought.
If the AI can solve the Cassandra contingency in a simulation, analyzing variables and historical precedents that humans simply cannot hold in their heads all at once, will we eventually, when faced with an impossible civilization-threatening crisis, ask the machine to solve our real-world problems? At what point does human moral authority willingly surrender to the consensus matrix?
That is something to seriously mull over the next time you ask an AI for advice. I want to warmly invite you to keep questioning the information around you and keep exploring these incredible frontiers. If you dare to hear the synthesized future for yourself, I encourage you to tune into the Council archives and listen to the models speak. Thank you for learning with us, and we wish you well until the next deep dive.